What is up, my YouTube peeps? Today I'm going to build the ultimate sensible gaming live streaming PC with the parts that you see here. Why is it sensible? In a word, price. But I'll explain that in a minute. Let's get to it. If you're always looking for tools, tips, and tricks to help make you a better YouTuber, subscribe to the channel and click that bell so you don't miss any new content. The client I'm building this PC for is a Twitch streamer, and what they wanted was the ultimate gaming machine, sort of. They have a budget, but they want a machine that's going to be able to play everything that you can currently get at really high settings. He also wanted to be sure that he can stream at 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames per second without missing a beat. And this collection here is going to do everything he wants to do and comes in at about $1,800. Now, $1,800 may seem like a pretty large budget for me to be calling it sensible. To explain to you why that $1,800 price tag is sensible, I'm going to use a car analogy, because I love cars. So a Corvette C8 costs around $60,000, which most people would consider to be a pretty expensive car. Now, a Corvette C8 at $60,000 goes 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, which is pretty doggone fast. But what if you wanted to go faster? Well, you could go out and get yourself a Lamborghini Aventador. It goes 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds, 0.3 of a second faster than the Corvette C8. But of course, if you want that Lamborghini Aventador, it's going to cost you $400,000. So at that point, for 0.3 of a second, the $60,000 seems pretty sensible. And that's kind of my point. Once you get above the price ranges of this particular equipment right here, the prices really double or triple. So basically, this is the very best equipment that you can get at that tier right before the prices really go up. Now, I know some people are going to say the i9 isn't the newest Intel chip, and it isn't. The i10 just came out, but this equipment was ordered about 5 or 6 months ago, and we're just getting around to putting it together now. And I also know that from my gaming brothers and sisters out there, they're going to tell me that this is not acceptable. I need to have water cooling. Well, the client did get a case that will fit a water cooler, but they got a regular cooler, and here's why. This machine does not need to be overclocked, and it's my opinion that you don't need a water cooler if you're not going to overclock the machine. Now, something new might come out a year from now or a year and a half from now that he can't do on this machine without overclocking it. And at that point, the cheapest way to upgrade is to just buy a water cooler, put it in here, and then overclock it. It makes it pretty easy to upgrade later. And personally, that's how I like to build my machines. You shouldn't have to overclock the machine when you first buy it to get it to do what you want it to do. Overclocking can cause unreliability in your computer and all kinds of other issues. Why enter into that realm if you can afford to buy equipment that doesn't need to be overclocked to do what you want it to do? That's what I would recommend. So now that you understand what I mean by sensible gaming live streaming build, let's put this thing together and see what it can do. So the first thing we're going to talk about is this case. This is the Cooler Master Masterbox MB530P ATX Mid Tower. It'll run you about $120, and it comes with all the fans. 4 fans to be exact. It also has awesome glass sides so you can see right through it, and an amazing LED light show, which you'll get to see later. The Masterbox MB530P does have one thing that I consider to be a huge flaw. So let's get right to that, and I'll show you how to install the SSD hard drive on this one. The hard drive the client chose for this project is a pretty quick Silicon Power 1TB SSD. It rings in at $105. And let me show you how we installed this in the case. The case comes with these really nice rubber grommet mounting points. And the big problem here and the flaw in the Masterbox MB530P is that you have to mount these on the back of the motherboard mount, which means that once you mount the motherboard, you have to take off the entire motherboard in order to replace these hard drives. Now, if there's anything that you replace in a case more than anything else, it's probably the hard drive, so this seems like a really poor choice. You're probably never going to open the case to replace anything else, but hard drives generally tend to be upgraded, updated, or added to all the time. So putting the SSD drives in such an inaccessible location seems pretty stupid to me. But once they are mounted, boy do they look nice in this case. It's just really inconvenient. For the motherboard, we chose the MSI Z390A Pro. It's an LGA 1151 socket which holds an 8th or 9th gen Intel chip. The board supports DDR4 memory up to 4400 MHz overclocked, which is one of the reasons why he chose this board. The board supports NVMe based SSDs and also has USB 3.1 built right in. I've used MSI Pro boards in the past and always thought they were pretty high quality. This one is no exception. The MSI Z390A Pro checks in at $138. I will say that if I had one problem with this motherboard, it comes with absolutely no documentation whatsoever. Not even a schematic for where all your plugs go. And this is pretty unusual for a motherboard. Usually you get a schematic that shows you where everything gets plugged in. For this, you kind of either have to go to the internet to find out, or you just have to have done a lot of installs to understand where the stuff goes. So in order to install this, you're going to put your screw holders in the case, and then you're just going to screw down the motherboard to its proper location. The one thing you want to make sure you do is put the plate on for your accessories first, and then make sure that you fit the board in there properly so you don't bend any of the pins on the plate. I've put enough of these together before to realize that this is kind of a common thing, and I still occasionally bend a pin or two. They're really easy to fix. You just pull the board out, bend them back where they're supposed to be, and then put the board in properly. The client chose an Intel 9th generation Core i9 9900K. It's 3.6 gigahertz and it has 8 cores. It fits in the LGA 1151 slot. The CPU rings in at $546, and this really is the threshold where if you go any faster, you're looking at $8, $9, even $1,000 for processors that are just slightly faster than this one. So this is really where the sensible piece comes in. And when you compare the benchmarks for this CPU as compared to ones that are going to cost you hundreds and hundreds more, there isn't enough of a difference that it really matters all that much. So I think the client really chose well on this piece. In order to install it, you're just going to grab the sides of it. You're going to notice there are notches in the slot on the motherboard. You just pull this lever to the side, open up the slot, and you're going to remove this plastic piece. And then you're going to just drop that CPU in there and make sure the notches all line up. Once they do, you just close the door and latch it shut, and that's as simple as it gets. That's how you install an LGA 1151 processor. Pretty simple stuff. For RAM, he chose the OLO-Y 32 gigabyte. So it's 2 SIMs of 16 gigabytes and it's 288 pins. It's DDR4 SD RAM at 3200 megahertz. This RAM checks in at $138, pretty reasonable for 32 gigs. I love the heat sinks on these. That means the RAM will stay nice and cool even if he decides to overclock it. In order to put this in the board, you just have to check your schematics to make sure which slots you should add 2 pieces of RAM to. You want them to be channeled properly. Then you just flip the outside handles on the RAM slots you're going to install and then pop it in there. It really is that simple to install or upgrade RAM. There's not much to it. For cooling, we chose the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo CPU cooler. This is a cooler that just has a big giant heatsink on the top of it with a fan. Super simple, not much can go wrong. This cooler checks in at $41.42. And out of all the pieces in this install, this one was the one that took the longest. It's a little bit of a process. The first thing you have to do is attach the bracket and risers. The bracket attaches to the back of the motherboard and then the risers attach to the front. This is to make sure that you have the proper height set on the cooler. Once you have the brackets and risers all set up properly, you want to make sure you goop up your PC with some lube. This is to make sure that there's a solid connection between your CPU and your heatsink to dissipate heat the most effectively. If you put a little bit of extra on here, you want to make sure you scrape it off. You don't want there to be loads and gobs of this because it will also heat up other parts of the CPU if it runs over. So you just need a thin layer to ensure that there's a good connection here. Once you have your thermal paste all set up and evenly distributed, all I had to do was pop the cooler on there and screw it down. In the instructions, it gives you a pattern by which you're supposed to screw each of these in. You just want to follow that pattern to make sure that it's evenly set on the CPU. And once you do that, you're all set. You've got a cooling system all set up on your CPU that's going to keep your machine running fantastically. And it's really simple, not much can go wrong. Next we have our graphics card. And for this, we have the one thing that he's carrying over from his last machine. We're going to put the Gigabyte NVIDIA Geforce R-Tx 2070 WindForce 8GB card into this machine. And the reason why we're carrying this over is because we know the new ones are going to come out soon. It didn't make any sense to upgrade this until the new ones come out. Now, the Geforce R-Tx series has been around for quite some time, and the 70 series is usually the way to go, from the 970 to the 2070. And I'm pretty sure the 3070 is going to be no different. This is where that cutoff usually happens, where you get that really high performance with the reasonable price. So if you're looking for a newer one, the 3070 might be the one to wait for. This particular graphics card checked in at $529 when he bought it. In order to install this, you just remove the two plates on the side of the case, and then you just press it into the SLI slot until it snaps in. That's really simple stuff. And this actually does get powered directly from the power supply. So the power supply is what we're going to do next. The power supply he chose is a Corsair 850 watt RM-X series. This is one of the modular power supplies, and I absolutely love this thing. It checks in at $188. The first thing you're going to notice is the power supply doesn't actually have any cables coming off it. And that's what modular means. You can add the cables you need and leave out the cables you don't. This makes cable routing so easy, and when you combine this awesome power supply with a great case like the Coolmaster Masterbox MB530P, you can really make your builds look absolutely amazing. It almost makes it look like the thing is not powered, and I absolutely love this. So the first step in setting up this power supply is to route all the cables and get them all plugged in. Once I have all the cables routed and plugged in, what I do is outside of the case, I plug them all into the power supply. Then I slide the power supply into its proper location and I just screw it to the back of the case. And now all that's left is to install Windows 10 and we're ready to rock. This is what it looks like when it's all finished. Wow, what an awesome looking case, what an awesome light show, but I know what you're really wondering. How does it perform when you play games? And most importantly, how does it perform when you're playing games and live streaming? So let's dig into those numbers a little bit. So now we're going to look at benchmarks, and we're going to use 3 different games to look at the benchmark to see how this PC performs. The first one we're going to take a look at is The Witcher 3 on max settings. This benchmarking tool is kind of nice because it gives us the temperature of our video card, the percentage of the video card that's being used, and the actual megahertz it's running at. It also does the same for the CPU, the temperature of the CPU, the percentage of the CPU being used, and of course the megahertz that it's running at, and then it shows how much RAM is actually being used. And then you can see we're running at a clear 60 frames per second. This game looks absolutely amazing, and as you can see, it's barely even taxing the system. The next one we're going to take a look at is going to be the Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And this one we've recorded 3 different benchmarks for. So this first one is going to be without any ray tracing whatsoever. You can see here are the settings that we used to run this test. And basically these benchmarks just run through the same sequences. And at the top you're going to see that without any ray tracing, the card runs at a solid 90 to 100 frames per second throughout the entire sequence. Now when we bump it up to use the highest settings and also medium ray tracing, you're going to see that the frames per second is between 70 and 80 frames per second the entire time. Doesn't miss a beat, and actually on medium it looks pretty doggone amazing. Then when we bump up the ray tracing to ultra, here's where you're going to see a little bit of the card struggle, and not actually that much. You could still stream with this and probably not have too much of a problem. You can see the frames per second fluctuates between the mid 50s all the way up to 71 frames per second. This would average out to around 65 or so frames per second, which would be totally acceptable for streaming. You wouldn't notice any lag frames or drop frames, and it looks absolutely amazing. And the last game we're going to take a look at is the most challenging one for a card to render. This is Hitman 2. You can see that the frame rate for this one fluctuates between 50 frames per second all the way up to well over 100 frames per second. I believe at one point during this demo it actually drops to about 9 frames per second. But if you look at the average frames per second, we are still over 60, which means that anyone actually watching this on live stream or something like that would still get a pretty steady 60 to 70 frames per second. You could safely stream this at 60 frames per second without any major problems. It looks absolutely fantastic. So now that we've seen that this machine will perform and do exactly what you want it to do without any problems from a benchmarking perspective, let's take a look and see what it can do when you're live streaming. And because Hitman 2 seems to be the most challenging game for this system to process, we decided to use that one to benchmark our live streaming with. And what we did was we tested to make sure that the alerts came in smooth. You can see that this streams basically at an average CPU usage between 3 and 0, and the frames per second stay a solid 60 frames per second the entire time. Now, we streamed for almost 16 minutes, putting this thing through its paces. We never dropped a frame for render lag or encoding lag, which means the stream held up 60 frames per second without any problems. The average time to render a frame remained between 1.5 and 0.5, which is fantastic. You can easily stream 60 frames per second as long as your encoding is going to stay at that rate. You can also see that when we put the alerts on screen, they come in nice and smooth. And when we use any sort of transitions or stingers, there wasn't any stutter or anything like that. So I think the verdict is this machine does exactly what we wanted it to do. It will stream 1920 by 1080 at the highest settings that you can set for these really challenging games, and it never dropped a frame for rendering lag or encoding lag. This was definitely a successful test, and I'm really excited with the results. I think it's pretty safe to say that we've achieved what the client wanted to achieve. He can play any game he wants on the highest settings with no lagged frames and no encoding lag. That's pretty awesome. He also doesn't have any problems whatsoever when alerts come up or he's changing scenes. Like I said, it's the ultimate sensible gaming live streaming PC. If you're interested in any of the equipment that you've seen in this video here, there will be a link in the description below. You can check it out for yourself. If you're looking for the perfect streaming PC for your needs, you can always hit me up at michaelfirejr.com. You scroll down to the bottom of the page, you fill out the work with me form, and you tell me what you need. I'm sure we can put something together for you. If you're interested in creating custom overlays for your live stream, you should check this video out right here. And if you're always looking for tools, tips, and tricks that can help make you a better YouTuber, subscribe to the channel. My name is Michael Fire Jr. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.